in the military, there's this sense of, hey, you're going to have more data than we know what to do with. You got to make decisions based on your training. And so they spend a lot of time training people, but you got to make decisions. One of the things I talk about in the military versus the civilian sector, in the military, it's all about lead, follow, or get out of the way. And what I mean by that is you first learn how to be a follower. Take orders, execute orders as long as they're lawful, and do the very best you can. Over time, you learn how to be a leader, and you learn that at times you're going to have to make the decision and be accountable for it. But one of the things you bring in the military setting is, who is the leader? How are we going to make this decision? And if you're not there, then get out of the way. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the SaaS Builder Podcast. I'm your host, Randy Wootton, and today we're actually going to discuss my experience leading a SaaS business. Joining me is Benjamin Shapiro, who is the CEO at I Hear Everything and the executive producer of the SaaS Builder Podcast, and a guy I have really enjoyed getting to know and excited to have this conversation. Ben has created a couple of questions for me about my experience as a SaaS builder. Ben, welcome to the SaaS Builder Podcast.
Excited to finally be here, Randy. I thank you for inviting me to be on the podcast.
Well, here we go.
Look, we were sitting around at a production meeting, and both my team that produces this podcast and your team, who's responsible for all of Maxio's marketing efforts, are saying it's wonderful that we are hearing from all these SaaS experts, but we've got that at home, and we want to know about you. And I wrote these questions. So I want you to know these are questions that I'm curious about because I think you are a great SaaS leader. You've come on my podcast before, and I learned a ton from you. And so I want to learn a little bit more. And I think everybody that is an avid fan of yours would love to hear a little bit more about the man behind the voice.
I'll tell you, Ben, I appreciate it, but just my disclaimer, I don't claim any expertise. I've been there for a little while, and I've got some war wounds to share.
All right, I'm going to make you brag at some point on this interview, but I'm going to start firing questions away, and I want to learn a little bit more about Randy. Let's start off with our first question today. Little known fact that you are a former member of the military, or once in the military, always in the military, but you were enlisted. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your experience, and tell me how military training helped you become a better SaaS leader.
Sure, Ben. And so, yes, I spent 12 years in the military. So as a veteran now, I didn't retire. I did 12 years. I didn't do the full 20, but I spent 4 years at the Naval Academy and then 8 years on active duty. 5 of those years, I was in flight status. I flew in A6 intruders, and it sounds really cool. It was. I wasn't a pilot. I sat next to the pilot and bitched. And then my last tour of duty was at the Naval Academy, where I taught literature. And so that was really the thing I wanted to do with the rest of my life, was to teach. But that was my first learning and lesson learned about supply and demand economics. There's a whole lot of people that have PhDs and very few jobs. Got into the business sector.
We got to get into the military stuff first before we get into the literature. And you were the man next to the pilot, which I can only infer means that if we were watching Top Gun, you would be Goose or Merlin, some sort of a navigator.
Exactly. It was a bombardier navigator. In the A6, you sat next to the pilot. So if the pilot was giving me too much attitude, I'd slap him. It's hard to do from the backseat of the F-14. But yeah, I was ultimately responsible for navigating, and then it was a bombardier navigator, the weapon systems, et cetera. But it was a really wonderful platform, and all the pilots I flew with were great. And so it was super cool. I will tell you, when you're flying behind the aircraft carrier at night and the aircraft carrier is bouncing around and you're relying on the person next to you to land it so you can get home safely, it's really unnerving. But the Navy does a wonderful job training the really best pilots in the world, and I never was really afraid for my life.
I grew up in a coddled suburb of San Francisco and went to a private school in Boston, not Harvard, only a mile away, and never picked up a gun in my entire life, with the exception of Camp Kennelin when I was like 11 years old. I've never raised arms, but everything I've heard about the military is it's about structure and detail and discipline. So tell me what you took out of that experience that applies to what you're doing today as the leader of a mid-sized SaaS company.
I think you're right, Ben. I think in general, those are the core virtues or values that many people appreciate about veterans and when hiring them into their companies. I think the things that aren't as appreciated about military folks is the level of flexibility required and the default to action. And so what I mean by that is one of the things you find in the military, so like flying jets, you're flying at 480 miles an hour. I think that's 8 miles minute or something like that. It's just wacky, crazy, fast, and you're consuming an enormous amount of information, right? You're processing all this data, and you have to be able to react in milliseconds, especially if you're in a combat situation. And I think that is a good metaphor for more broadly in the military. There's this sense of, hey, you're going to have more data than we know what to do with. You got to make decisions based on your training. So they spend a lot of time training people, but you got to make decisions. One of the things I talk about in the military versus the civilian sector, in the military, it's all about lead, follow, or get out of the way. And what I mean by that is you first learn how to be a follower. Take orders, execute orders as long as they're lawful, and do the very best you can. Over time, you learn how to be a leader, and you learn that at times you're going to have to make the decision and be accountable for it. But one of the things you bring in the military setting is, who is the leader? How are we going to make this decision? And if you're not there, then get out of the way. If you're not going to be following in terms of executing the mission, you're just wasting time. And I think one of the things that was really unique for me as I transitioned from the military to the corporate sector was that lead, follower, get out of the way became lead, follower, let's talk about it. And in the corporate sector, it seems like you would sit in meetings and people would want to opine. And I don't know, you're not adding a lot of value. Why are you here? Are you here to either be the leader to help us drive this thing forward, or be a follower and collectively help us accomplish the mission? So it took me a long time to transition to appreciate that, no, there is this other way of functioning, which is talking about things for a long time. And I do think large companies struggle with that. That was one of my experiences at Microsoft in particular. I love Microsoft for many reasons, but part of the challenge was it did feel like we spent a lot of time about building consensus and figuring out how you're going to collaborate. And I think military leaders in particular are much more clear about, look, if it's your decision, that's fine. Make the decision. But if it's my decision, I'm going to make the decision. I'll take your input. I'm certainly excited to hear about it, but at some point we got to move forward. So I think the speed is one of the things that is a characteristic.
Decisiveness, lead, follow, or get out of the way resonates a lot with me, mostly working with imperfect information. Nobody's holding a gun to your head when you're running a SaaS business, I hope. Yep. Maybe there's some rare exceptions, but we've all had those VCs.
Yes.
Sometimes you just got to make a decision, and whatever decision is, live with it and move on. All right. Speaking of moving on, we're going to go on to our second question. After you left the military, rumor has it you mentioned Microsoft. You also worked at Salesforce, one of the biggest SaaS companies in the world. So how did working at Salesforce help you understand the SaaS landscape?
So previous to Salesforce, I had been in ad tech, and the ad tech business model is about selling ads and slinging ads, make it pink, make it blink. And I'd spent a lot of time at ad tech companies. And when I left Microsoft, I actually went to another startup before going to Salesforce. One of the things I wanted was to be in more of a pure SaaS business, one which Mark Benioff had come up with the brilliant expression of SaaS. Back when I started in software, we used to call it web-based ASP, certainly not as sexy as SaaS. And so I wanted to be at a company that was actually doing and delivering what the promises of SaaS. Like, it's a software delivery model, and it's also a business model where you're paying for it out of your operating expense versus CapEx. The second part was I understood the software, but in SaaS, one of the critical things to get right is the services that you provide in addition to the software. And so this is the customer success model. How do you invest in those customers? Because you spend a lot of money acquiring the customers in this business model, and the payoff is in the lifetime value. How many years are they customers? And that's what the organizations like customer success focus on, is maximizing the value that you articulate, deliver, and capture for customers.
The SaaS is the fundamental product, but what reduces churn is your customer success. I also want to double click on something you said, that I'm a podcast producer and I haven't worked at Salesforce. When you are selling software, it comes out of something, not CapEx. Tell me what that meant.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Operating expense versus CapEx. So CapEx is, it used to be when you bought legacy software, you would take it off your balance sheet and use cash, and you have an investment, and they would call it on-prem software. And then you're just like, oh my God, I bought this huge software package, and you might have a maintenance support contract, but you bought the car or you bought the house. Mm-hmm. The operating expense.
You own the floppy disk.
You own the floppy disk. Yeah, that's what it became, right? It used to be you own the box, and then you own the floppy disk. What it became, the SaaS model is more like renting an apartment. Is you're getting access through operating expense on an ongoing basis, usually a monthly fee or an annual fee. You're getting access, much like with Netflix, right? You're not owning all the films. You're doing a subscription business, right? Software as a service, a subscription business model. So it really changed the way that CFOs and CEOs thought about how did they acquire software. They didn't have to make this huge investment in year one and have them come back in year 3 or year 5 and do another huge investment. It was an ongoing investment that actually increase or decrease based upon consumption. So how many seats are you buying for your number of salespeople, for example? So I think it was a step forward on the spectrum of better aligning value with price.
It seems like the connection is that the alignment between what you're selling and generating reoccurring revenue, which brings us into our next question. So, Randy, we've shied away from talking about Maxio as much as we can to try to provide value to SaaS founders without being heavy-handed in terms of promoting your company. But I do want to get into the general area that Maxio talks about. What are some of the biggest problems facing SaaS founders when it comes to billing?
Yeah, Ben, part of the reason I joined Maxio is I was a customer of one of the legacy products. Maxio is the mashup of two companies, Chargify and SaaS Optics. And I was a customer of SaaS Optics and at my previous company. It literally changed my life. So the biggest issue you have is part of the challenge of the SaaS business model is this idea of deferred revenue and revenue recognition and understanding how that translates into revenue. It sounds simple, but it is so complicated. And when you add in lots of customers, you add in lots of products, you add in multiple regions, it just gets more and more complicated. And most companies are trying to do this with Excel files. And anyone who has done this knows that Excel will start to bog down. Number one. Number two is people having access to the Excel file or G Sheets can fat finger the cell and everything goes wrong. And so having a system of record for billing and invoicing allows you to manage your business. And more importantly, for early stage founders, it helps you raise money. This is when investors invest in your company, they're investing in your customers, but more specifically, they're investing in the revenue associated with the customers. And if you don't have an accurate way of representing that and showing your customer cohort analysis, who churned, why they churned, the net retention, lifetime value, magic number, I can go on and on. All these metrics that VCs in particular use to pattern match and determine whether you are a viable investment come out of this system. So it's not the billing and invoicing. It's super important to have billing and invoicing. It really is the business intelligence you get to run your business better and to raise money.
So it seems like there's a three-pronged problem here. One is the legacy systems trying to put together something yourself, Excel, just becomes cumbersome when you start to grow. And the second one is legitimacy with the people that are going to be investing in your company. If I'm an early stage SaaS founder, when should I be thinking about trying to build a system of record? Is this before I sell my first product, when I have $1 million of ARR? What's generally the threshold where my billing problems start to become more trouble than they're worth?
I guess it's when do you want cash in the bank? Because at some point, you got to get paid for what you're doing. So the first step forward on this whole billing and financial operations is having a billing system. And so that's what we offer as well. It's like we can get you up and running with payments and billing, a billing portal, and customers start to pay you. So after maybe you get your first couple of customers, you've negotiated a deal with your friends and family to get paid, and you're sending contracts in Word, but you really want to start to build a set of customers. You need a billing solution. The RevRec reporting usually comes when you want to take private money, meaning VCs or early stage angels. You may move from cash accounting to accrual accounting. You may move from having Bob, your uncle, do your books to actually having a fractional CPA firm. And then all of a sudden, you need to make sense of your back office. And that, I would suggest, a lot of technical founders don't prioritize the back office in the same way they prioritize the front office. They'll contract for a CRM system, they'll hire a sales guy or gal, and then the back office trying to make sense of what happened, getting paid on time. So the other piece, Ben, is really the order to cash, is you set up the order and are you going to get paid, or is there going to be discrepancies? Like all of that back office stuff that the technology founder is not interested in doing, we can help solve.
All right. That was the question that I have that I wanted to position to you to appease the Maxio team. This is my selfish question. You're sitting here doing a podcast. You're a successful CEO. Tell me, why are you investing your time and your company's resources in creating media?
Ben, I spent a bunch of years in go-to-market tech in the marketing world. I'm a firm believer in the importance of building brand. The challenge is, how do you do brand? And I do think this whole media-led growth strategy is one of the ways it is a brand that's trying to break out. So Maxio as a brand, We're 2 years old with not a lot of brand awareness in the marketplace. It's a great way to try to build brand. Now, how do you measure that versus buying more search keywords? It's the age-old debate. I don't know. But I'll tell you, I think that for me personally, when I listen to podcasts from people that are, to your earlier comment, providing interesting insights or providing interesting guests, it has a brand halo. It helps me remember who they are and makes me have preference. There's this great company. Oh, shoot, now I could totally flake on it. But they advertise on NPR, and I used to listen to NPR when I was driving. It was an AI
That's right.
company.
Weren't you an Ira Glass guy?
Yeah,
Was that
totally.
who you told me about?
Yeah. And the ad would come on board, and I was like, well, good for you. And so based on an NPR radio ad, I looked out and found him and brought him on board and said, hey, how can we work together? So I don't know how many people are listening to this more broadly, but I think it has value for the brand. I think it has value for current customers. So they hear from the CEO talking about topics they care about. I think it has value for the salespeople that they use it in their outreach. And I think it has value for our employees. I don't know, maybe only my mother is listening to it, you and my mother. But I think that for the employees to find out more about the CEO, we're sharing stories I haven't told and providing perspective from, gosh, I don't know, it's been 25 years in the corporate sector and lots of stories that will probably bore them. But I think it helps humanize the CEO as well. So I think there's all of the Maxio brand and personal brand benefit we get from this.
See, now you understand why we popped this interview on your calendar and are surprising you with questions that we didn't give you a chance to prepare for. We want to get to know you.
Well,
that's the whole point. All right, we got it.
All right, there you go.
All right, I've got the last question for you. This one comes from our head of content production, who listened to all sorts of podcasts that you were featured in before I Hear Everything started working with Maxio. And Todd told me that you are an avid reader and always talk about the books that you're reading and what you're getting. What are the books that every SaaS founder should read?
Wow.
And why?
Yeah, that is a great question. So I think there are a couple I would put on the top list. Just any leader should read Drucker, The Effective Executive. I was trying to write a book on the 8 Secrets of Success for a SaaS CEO, and I reread Drucker from like 1960 or whatever it was. I was like, oh my God, the guy's already said it all. Now it's old, right? It's tone deaf for the modern audience. But if you want to really learn about management, that's number one. Number 2 is a book by a guy named Larry Bossidy called Execution. And the thing I like about Execution, it's super clear about how do you create operating plans in an execution system to drive a business forward. And I really appreciated that coming out of the military to our earlier conversation and thinking about discipline and measurements. You get what you inspect. All those constructs and translating it into a business setting is I have a business radar. I set up the scorecards and the metrics and things are popping red and we go dig in on them. So execution for me is a huge one. Playing to Win is one of my favorite ones. Playing to Win is about category creation, so I tend to focus on early stage companies and how do you create category leaders and what are the plays you do there and the lightning strike moment, and I think there's just an enormous amount of value from that one. And then I'll give a plug to our keynote speaker at our CKO next week is a guy named Bruce Cleveland, who's written a book called Traversing the Traction Gap. I think that's right. We'll put it in the show notes. Okay. It's a great book. It breaks out building businesses along 4 different archetypes and how do you think about building those. And it's a very different way of looking at an early stage company rather than seed, series A, B, and C. This has a much more sophisticated way to evaluate where are you on your scaling journey and what are the setup, where in the system you need to focus energy and effort. But Ben, I could go on for hours about books.
That's what I've heard, and I didn't realize you were such a reader. Have you read my favorite? Is Built to Sell by John Warlow?
I don't think I have. It's on my stack. It's the increasing stack of books by your bedside table versus the ones you've actually completed. But I will go, if that's your favorite book, I will go read it.
Or businesses, right? Like we are not a $50 million revenue business. We're podcast producers that have a boutique service for clients. But it is basically the story of moving beyond professional services into formulated products that you can sell and build repeatable structures. Honestly, it might be a little early for you, but it's been influential in mine. And also John's got a great podcast, Built to Sell Radio.
Oh, there you go.
Randy, surprise question.
Okay.
Give me one last thing that you have not said on a podcast that the people that are listening to you need to know.
I will tell you a lesson learned through my career. So I like to exercise. It's the only thing I do for me. I have a wife and family and kids, and I get up early in the morning to work out. And I remember early in my mid-career, there were people who said, you're not going to be able to maintain that schedule. and you're going to have to give me working. This is like Microsoft, where you work 100-hour work weeks. And I committed to myself, no, this is the only way I manage my stress is to have some time to do exercise. And I think it has made me a better father. I think it makes me a better friend. I think it makes me a better husband to have some commitment to a regular exercise regimen. And so I just encourage everybody out there, like wherever you are in your career, is make sure you take care of yourself first. And that's mind, body, and spirit. And I think making time to get the physical activity, go out for a walk. One of my favorite things to do now is in this COVID world is I will try to get a walk a day where I'll put on headphones and just go walk around this lake that's right near me. And I find that I'm actually more engaged in the conversations because I can't multitask. But I also find it's just the endorphins of doing that. And I think that would be one thing. Where I'm failing is I keep thinking like I'm going to embrace meditation. Like every year, in January, I'm going to do 20 minutes twice a day and settle myself and get in touch with who I really am and be present in every moment. And I don't know, the last 10 years I've tried and I've never been able to do it. So maybe this is the year for me to be able to incorporate meditation into my life.
I've been trying the same battle. I use the calm.com app.
Oh, me too. Me too.
And it's got the 10 minutes daily, and I probably do it once a week, maybe twice. And most of the time when I'm too stressed out.
Yep.
But at least it's a good excuse to start and spend 10 minutes by yourself.
And I think that's like anything, to build a habit, you start small, and it's about being consistent and regular. I think my challenge with Calm is when I was doing it, I was falling asleep. Like, I'm so tired that I just fall asleep. Now, someone would say, Randy, you're getting up too early to work out if you're falling asleep during the middle of the day. I get it, but it's the trade-off that I want to make. So,
Randy, it's good to get a little time with you, get to know you a little better, and I'm sure that the audience is excited to hear from you as well. So thanks for telling us a little bit about you this time. And it's your podcast. You got to read the outro.
I guess so. But Ben, first, thank you very much. You've just been great. And I've really enjoyed the partnership we've had and helping me become a better interviewer and helping us think about how to do this thing. This was an experiment for us last year, and just you've taken it to a whole nother level. So thank you. But here we go.
We're
that wraps.
Just getting started.
Yeah, that's right. That wraps up this episode of the SaaS Builder Podcast. Thanks to Benjamin Shapiro, CEO at I Hear Everything, for being my guest. If you'd like to contact Ben, you can find a link to his LinkedIn profile in our show notes. His podcast is the MarTech Podcast, one that I listen to, and you can find at martechpod.com, or you can visit his company website at iheareverything.com. If you'd like a summary or list of links mentioned in this podcast or links to some of the books, or if you're interested in becoming our next guest speaker, please visit SaaSBuilderPod.com. If you're a SaaS builder who needs help simplifying recurring billing or streamlining your subscription management, like Ben and I were chatting about, visit us at Maxio.com. And lastly, if you haven't subscribed yet and want a stream of SaaS growth tactics in your feed, hit the subscribe button in your podcast app, search for SaaS Builder on YouTube, or reach out on LinkedIn. I promise this is the only episode about me. All the other episodes are about super cool, really successful SaaS leaders and influencers. I'm Randy Wootton. That's it for today. Until next time, remember, there's always a path to unlock your next stage of growth.